There we go. Good morning. So welcome to our 15th installment of EO Exchange. It says highly rated. We have to remember we are highly rated EO Exchange, and they're fantastic, and I love these. Today's learning is brought to us by Jim Cumbie, who is a longtime SAP with his M&A execution and strategic planning business, Tennessee Valley Group. My brother Mike and I have personal experience with Jim's company, and he asked us to participate a little bit today, so hopefully that part doesn't bore you too bad. A little reminder on the format. Jim's going to present for about 30 minutes. We'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A, and then we'll break out into smaller groups to kind of go over 3 or 4 people and discuss that amongst ourselves. We'll reconvene briefly at the end, and a couple reminders. Put your questions in the chat. We'll get to those about the bottom of the hour. And what else? What am I missing? Don't forget to do the survey when we're done. Surveys are super important, so thank you for doing that. So on to the show, real quick. Jim Cumbie has been in the M&A space for over 25 years. With his current group, Tennessee Valley Group, he consistently works with other SAPs like some here, so Pinnacle and Baker and Bradley and those guys. He's an attorney. He also has his MBA from a lightly regarded institution in the Boston area with the initials Harvard. But then, so Jim brings all the credentials. He and his wife have been married for 35 years, 3 children, 5 grandchildren. And Marla asked me for a fun fact. So Jim, I hope you don't mind me bringing this one up. But at one point in Jim's career, I believe it was a trio, and he traveled the country in the music business. And so,
quartet.
Sorry, yes, in the quartet. So one of our next social events, pull them aside and we'll get tales from the road from Jim Cumbie. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for doing this, and always good to see you.
How do you know that? Okay. Do I do a screen share to get? Is that how?
I'm getting the thumbs up. Yes.
Okay. Can you all see that? Are we good? Okay, we're on mute. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Richard. I didn't know that you knew that about me. That is a whole level of conversation that is an important part of my life that I'll tell you about sometime. I've been developing this concept that I want to share with you all for the first time. Actually, say it this way: I've been developing this concept for 25 years because it really is kind of a culmination of all that I've learned about business valuation. Even going back to some of my strategic planning days at Disney, I've taken a lot of things I've learned and kind of thrown it into one presentation, and I'm kind of testing this idea on you guys. So I hope you find it valuable. But as is always the case, the teacher always learns more than the students. I've learned a lot through this process, and I hope you will too. The real punchline here is, you can sell your business for an irrationally high valuation, but the way you do that is to think like a smart buyer, not like an owner. Now, some of you realize already that I put smart in quotes, which should tell you that there's something coming that'll explain that a little bit later. And if you wait to the end, I'll tell you how to get a valuation matrix, my qualitative assessment, which I call the 7 principles of irresistibility. And I recently published a new document called 87 Things Every Business Owner Should Know About Selling Their Business. And I'd be happy to send that to you. But we'll talk about that at the end. Now, as a point of context, a couple of examples. You all know that MGM Studios recently went onto the market. The Wall Street Journal reported that this company was probably worth $5 billion. That was the expectation going in. And these were the companies that took a look at MGM Studio. And these are all names that you would expect: Apple TV, Disney, Comcast, Sony, Discovery, and Amazon. All took a hard look at the MGM library. Well, as you all probably know, Amazon was the winner in that contest. What you may not know is they paid $8.45 billion for this company, which is a 70% premium over what the Wall Street Journal thought the company was worth. Now, I would call that an irrational valuation. Well, why would Amazon do that? Well, I think we all understand it's all about Amazon Prime, which means selling more toilet paper. So Amazon overpaid for MGM because they want to sell more toilet paper and everything else that Amazon Prime sells. But the real punchline here is Amazon had an ulterior motive. So kind of plant that thought in your brain, an ulterior motive. I wonder how many of y'all know what this place is. Show of hands up, thumbs up. No, that is one of my favorite places in Nashville, Cheekwood Mansion. My wife and I go out there a lot, have lunch, stroll the grounds. It's kind of a good place to actually get away in the middle of the day and just do some thinking. This is the home of Leslie Cheek, who was an investor in the Cheek Neal Coffee Company. And one of their products was Maxwell House. Well, I think it was 1924, they were acquired by Postum Cereal. Postum Cereal. Now, why would a cereal company buy the Cheek Neal Coffee Company? By the way, Postum is now part of General Foods. It's all been integrated. Well, they paid $40 million for this company. Postum paid $40 million for Cheek Neal, which in today's dollars is $650 million. Seems like a lot of money for a small Nashville coffee company. But again, they had an ulterior motive. Postum wanted to get, Postum was a cereal company, right? They wanted to expand their breakfast presence. They wanted to sell more to their breakfast customers. And what a better way to do that than be in the coffee business? But Postum had an ulterior motive. So you're asking the question, how do I get this kind of crazy coffee money? Well, find the ulterior motive. Think about your buyer and find their ulterior motive. And here's how you do that. I'm not just going to leave you that principle. We're going to actually walk through how to do this. And I say, you think like a smart buyer. You don't ask the company, you don't ask this question, what's my company worth? Ask this question, who is the best buyer for my company? And what can I do to make it valuable for them? And if you hang with me, we're going to talk about some very specific ways to do this. Now, let me start as a context, though, and just kind of give you the lay of the land. For most companies that, let's say, over $5 million of revenue, you have two kinds of buyers. You have the rational buyer, which is private equity, and you have what I'll call the irrational buyer, which is the smart buyer. Now, let me just lay the foundation for how private equity works. Most of you know this, but I think it's just kind of a good context. They will look at your business quantitatively and qualitatively, but they're going to ask one question. And this is really all you need to know about private equity. Private equity is an incredibly simple business that comes down to this one principle. Can I get a 3 to 4x return on invested equity in 5 to 6 years? 3 to 4 and 5 to 6. That's private equity in a nutshell. That's all you need to know. Now, many of you have seen this valuation quadrant. I'm not going to go into detail on it just in the interest of time, but the vertical axis shows that your valuation is a function, kind of a triangulation, if you will, of your revenue growth and your EBITDA margin. So let's say you've got a business. I'm going to move this panel. Let's say you've got a business with 9% revenue growth rate and a 17% EBITDA margin. That would fall kind of right in here somewhere. And I'm going to give that business for this conversation a 6.5 multiple. Okay. That's just kind of a starting point. And so what I would do next. So again, the company, the buyer, the rational buyer looks at your EBITDA, your revenue growth rate, and your margin. And in this example, they came up with a 6.5 multiple. But as I said, they also will look qualitatively at your business. And this is what I call the 7 principles of irresistibility. They'll look at the scalability of your business, the quality of your financials, the diversity of your customer base, the level of dependence on the owner of the business, the sustainability of revenue, the competitive advantage your company brings, and the believability of your growth story. Now, I created a couple of years ago a 17-question assessment to help you understand your company on these 7 principles of irresistibility. And I'm not going to go through it, but I'll send it to you upon your request. But let me just kind of show you how it works. In our example, we had a company with a 6.5 quantitative score. Well, if you take my test and you score 80 or above, it's likely to increase your multiple by 40%. If you score 61 to 80 on my test, it's likely to increase your multiple by 15 to 30%. If you score 46 to 60, your multiple is probably going to stay about the same. Now, if you score that 21 into 45 range, your multiple is going to go down. It's going to decrease 20 to 30%. And if you're below 20, you're really selling for asset value at best. So just kind of by looking at this chart, you see a very quantitative process, right? Well, that's sort of the nature of the private equity buyer. They'll look at you quantitatively. And in our example, we said we're worth 6.5x. But then they're going to apply a qualitative score or qualitative assessment, and that'll move your multiple up or down. But remember this, no matter how else they think about it, they're going to ask this question. Am I getting 3 to 4 and 5 to 6? In other words, am I getting 3 to 4 times return on equity in 5 to 6 years? So I'm not going to take you through this chart either. This has got a lot of math, but it kind of shows you how a private equity investor would look at an acquisition and then forecast 5 years out and make an assessment whether they get the 3 to 4 and 5 to 6. They'll always ask this question, and that's really all you need to know about private equity. But we didn't come today to talk about private equity. I just kind of wanted to lay that foundation. We're talking today about the irrational buyer, which I call the smart buyer, SMART. Here's what the smart buyer represents. Their strategic motivation amplifies rational thinking. So the irrational buyer is not irrational. They start with a very rational point of view, but they've got a strategic motivation that amplifies that. And that strategic motivation is their ulterior motive. Now, here's some motivations a buyer might look for. Does the acquisition of your company provide cheaper growth for them? Is it faster growth for them? Maybe they're looking to eliminate price pressure by taking out a competitor. Maybe they want to control the value chain. Maybe they want to leverage fixed cost and or their operating skills. Well, these are the typical kind of motivations that a smart buyer will look at. Now, I want to bring Richard and Michael back in and get their input to a couple of things because as Richard indicated, I helped these guys sell their company a couple of years ago. And it really provides a fascinating perspective on how a strategic buyer thinks. So let me start. I'll ask either one of Richard and Michael. You guys are rolling along, running your business. Everything's fine. You like what you're doing. You've got a good business. Then voila, all of a sudden you think maybe we should sell. Let me ask you, what circumstances led you to think about selling your company? I'll ask you one of just take it from there.
The main circumstance was we got a call from one of the big guys, and so we weren't really it really wasn't in our thought to sell. We've gotten a bunch of calls, but once from private equity people or just door kickers, but tire kickers, but getting a call from somebody like Graphic, which is a large publicly traded company, was kind of one said, well, maybe we should look at that. But that was kind of the first time we thought about it, to be honest.
But there was a lot going on in the background there as well with industry consolidation mainly. So consolidation in our customer base, consolidation in our supplier base. Really, there were only 2 companies that made our raw material, graphic packaging being one of them. And then we learned that Graphic bought one of our primary competitors. And so suddenly there was consolidation there as well. And so one of our main suppliers just became one of our main competitors. And that got our attention as well. But really, we were planning on just riding it out till the phone rang.
So let me set the stage here. Graphic was one of your suppliers. You bought paper from Graphic. And you've got a big competitor out there that you're doing business with, and you've done business with against for years. You have a supplier that buys your biggest competitor. Now, I can see where that'd be a little troubling. Did you? I mean, in one sense, it's opportunity, but in one sense, it's troubling. Did you did you consider not selling? I mean, what I say it this way, what was the risk of going solo, of staying, in your current situation?
There certainly was risk. There are two, like Mike said, there are two suppliers for our raw material, and we bought about $15 million a year of this product. But we were only about 20% with Graphic and 80% with their largest competitor. And they kind of think like Coke and Pepsi. It's just two, right?
Right.
So we were buying 80% from Coke, and Graphic was, or the 20% from Pepsi, so to speak. So, and it's not uncommon in the folding carton industry, which is really kind of the world we were living in, to compete with those big companies as an independent. So it wasn't uncommon, but I will certainly say it was unsettling, to say the least, that we would be competing, because at that point, we had one raw material. Really, paper is our only raw material. And at that point, if Graphic wanted it, if they wanted to go buy a piece of business, it was a lot easier for them to do that, where they could do that easily, where it would be impossible for us to go buy a piece of business, because the raw material was such a large percentage of the cost.
And it also left us a little more vulnerable, just because we lost some leverage. We would strategically play those guys off each other, right, to try to get the best price on our single raw material. I mean, it was super important. And so then, when this happened, we felt like we lost a little leverage. So it did make us a little more vulnerable, but we like to think we could have made it.
Yeah. Well, but if you turn the conversation, are you looking at it from their perspective, from Graphic's perspective? Here they are, a publicly traded company. They've got very specific growth targets that they've laid before the public markets. They have to meet. You guys represented 20% of your raw materials was Graphic, which meant by acquiring you, they could have 100%. So they were acquiring significant business by further integration of their value chain, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So in addition to making a rational purchase, there was, if you will, an irrational motive. Their ulterior motive was to, faster growth by absorbing, a whole new, taking a customer from 20% to 100%.
And that's 100% correct. And then the other piece to that is when they bought our largest competitor, so there were like 5 people that kind of lived in our space, and we were probably the 3rd largest out of those 5. And they bought the big guy first. And when they bought them, they announced, they said, look, we're starting an entirely new division. This is going to be an important part for us in the future. And so I think they were trying to build that whole division out. And they only had one stake in the ground at that point. And also, it was important to them, I think, to have more pieces of that pie or puzzle. So
this is your garden variety expansion of the value chain. Here's a raw materials provider acquiring a customer.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they got that additional $12 million just boom overnight, right? And so that part was easy. And then, to Richard's point, they had said that they're getting into this, the air filtration market was growing, while other segments of their folding carton business were shrinking. And so they made a strategic decision to get into this space, and they just decided to do it in a big way. And then I think once they took a look at our operation, they also saw a few other things they liked in terms of assets and geography and capacity and that sort of thing.
But we because of this kind of background, these background circumstances, we knew going into this conversation they were going to pay more than private equity was. We just knew that because they had an ulterior motive, right? Well, let's talk about. I mean, and the real point I think we're trying to communicate here is, if you see your business the way a buyer does, you're more likely to do the things that will make your business more valuable. Now, if a buyer will look at your business and see a large addressable market, established customer demand, maybe your business provides some kind of fear of disruptive threat to the buyer, or maybe your business takes the buyer someplace that they need to go, then you're talking coffee money. This is how the Cheek Neal family was able to sell a small Nashville-based coffee business for, today's $650 million, because this is how Postum looked at their business. Now, there are about 4,000 private equity companies in the United States, and they're easy to find, databases everywhere, no big deal. But the smart buyer is really represented by what I call strategic buyers. There are 95,000 companies in the United States, according to Zoom Info, which is a pretty sophisticated database of companies. Zoom Info, and not to be confused with Zoom, the video product world now, Zoom Info. There are 95,000 companies that have $25 million of revenue or more. And I'm going to, for this conversation, consider those the potential strategic buyers for your company. Now, obviously, not all 95,000 are even in the ballpark. So how do you begin to evaluate those? Well, you've got to find how your business fits an ulterior motive for that buyer. And here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to give you some very specific ways to think through this. How to identify your smart buyer out of the 95,000. You need to sit down, and I'm going to recommend you do this once a year. Let's kind of go through this exercise and write out all your competitors. Then you want to list all the companies that are similar to yours. I mean, you may not compete with them, but they're similar to yours. Okay. Then look at all the companies that are part of your value chain, your suppliers and your customers. Just like in the case of Richard and Michael, Graphic was part of their value chain. What was the other company, Richard, that you guys?
It was WestRock.
WestRock, yeah. You had two suppliers, WestRock and Graphic. They were part of your value chain. So if you guys had been going through this exercise 3 years ago, you would have listed WestRock and Graphic as potential buyers. And finally, look for companies that have common customers. This is how Cheek Neal hit the radar screen of Postum. Common customer in the Postum breakfast business was a breakfast coffee drinker, right? So this kind of exercise will help you identify the universe of your potential buyers. Now, once you have these companies, and I've kind of got this mental vision, each of you business owners are in your respective conference room, and you've got on your whiteboard these categories of companies. You've just thrown them on a whiteboard, no rhyme or reason to them, but they're on the whiteboard. So here's how you kind of further evaluate it. Ask these questions. For whom does my business provide cheaper or faster growth, elimination of price pressure, value change leverage, fixed or variable cost leverage? Now, Michael, had I asked you guys to do this 3 years ago, Graphic would have hit your radar screen immediately, right? I mean,
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, right in the center of that universe. Well, here's another set of questions you can ask. Be a little bit more disciplined in your evaluation. Does my business represent a large addressable market? Have I established customer demand? Does my business provide a potential of disruptive threat to any of these companies that are on my radar screen here? And does my company provide a road to someplace they might want to go? Well, these are the questions that help you identify potential buyers' ulterior motives. And ulterior motives are what drives an irrational valuation. So every year, you should sit down and complete, number one, do a quantitative evaluation of your business. Kind of understand where your multiple is. The number two, I would encourage you to every year also look at the 7 principles, do a qualitative audit. And that'll kind of help you understand, does my multiple go up? Does my multiple go down? That'll just give you kind of a basic framework for how to think about the value of your company. And then finally, I would encourage you every year to do a smart buyer audit, like we just talked about. I told Richard and Michael, we were chatting earlier this week. I said, a lot of times when I do a presentation, it's about, kind of things to think about if you want to sell your company over the next year or two. But this is a process that I'd encourage every business owner to do. If selling is not even on your radar screen, you want to go ahead and still do this to get ahead of the curve, because it'll help you kind of understand the potential for your market and better understand how to make your company valuable, and not just wait for that buyer to show up and put a number on the table to get ahead of the curve. I've said many times before that the preparing to sell your company makes your company more valuable anyway. So why not go ahead and do it? So if you do these things, this is my prescription for how to get your coffee money. Understand your valuation every year, understand your business quantitatively and qualitatively, and can on an ongoing basis conduct this smart buyer audit. Now, if you just drop me an email, jim@tnvalleygroup.com, I'll send you the valuation matrix that I blew through real quickly. I'll send you the 7 principles of irresistibility, qualitative assessment that I blew through real quickly. And I'll also send you my latest publication, 87 things every business owner should know about selling their business. Or of course, we could just sit down and have a cup of coffee. I'd be happy to do that too. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Richard. I'm inside my 30-minute window, and I'll be happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Perfect. So I appreciate it. And guys, if you have any questions, I know, Jim, you may want, can you unshare there and get everybody back on the screen? Boom. So if you have questions, you can drop in the chat, or you can, or just raise your hand. We'll try to do it that way too. Dan Hogan, you're first.
Jim, this is as usual really helpful. I think my takeaway is obviously that a strategic buyer has duplicative advantage and layers of value that a financial buyer doesn't have. I guess the question that comes to mind for me is in tightly held industries that are very cohesive and a lot of relationships are intertwined, there is some risk at times of putting forward the notion that you're for sale. What recommendations do you have to explore that possibility anonymously? How is that? Is there a process for that? Like, I'm just curious as to how you can gather information without putting out there that you're available or considered.
Well, in some respects, Dan, I'll challenge the premise of the question. That I think that there is a lot less risk of appearing open to selling than you might think. I mean, what's really the downside? I mean, so I think just as a starting point, sophisticated buyers know everything is for sale. I mean, we all know that, right? So I don't think if you were in an industry meeting, let's say you're at a conference, now that conferences are restarting, gratefully, just get to know them, just kind of be in their orbit, be on their radar screen. I don't think that nothing I've said really says you've got to go out and say to the buyer, "Hey, I'm for sale." But the more you know about a potential buyer, the more you know about his or her strategy, the more likely it is to kind of be able to talk about your company within the context of understanding what their strategy is. So I don't think it's as simple, or it's not as blatant as wearing a placard around your chest saying, "Hey, I'm for sale, let's talk." It's really about knowing more about their business, and I think it's kind of a much more organic process. I mean, in the case of Richard and Michael, Graphic knew their company well, and look, I've said before, and I think Dan, you and I maybe even had this conversation before. The good news about selling to a strategic buyer is they pay more. The bad news is it's got to be on their radar screen. You generally can't force it.
Jim, it's Rosemary, and I've got sort of the reverse of Dan's question, and this may not be an answerable question, and it could be for any three of you. So, any brilliance or words of wisdom about trying to discern? Let's say you've been approached by a potential buyer, and they're hitting some of these or several of these buttons that indicate they're motivated and for strategic reasons. Any insights into how to balance that opportunity with the thought, wow, should I do a process and put myself out there?
Richard, Michael, you have any observation on that?
The question about the process, I didn't feel like our team could handle us going through a process. Now, we were fortunate that we had the other part of the story we didn't tell, that Graphic called us first and we just ignored them, didn't ignore them. We just told them thanks, but no thanks. And then we got a call later in the year from their competitor. And so that was the game changer for us. So we didn't really go through a process, but we had 2 people. I don't think our team could have handled a process. I really don't. And so that would have been my fear more than anything else. I don't know, Mike, if you have a different opinion than I do.
No, I mean, Dan, to your point, we were scared to death about competitors finding out, and certainly about our employees finding out, and all that sort of thing. And so I definitely understand that hesitation. I think Jim did sort of talk us off the ledge a bit about sort of what's the worst that could happen if a competitor finds out. I mean, heck, they would do the same thing in this position.
Mhm.
And what can they really do about it other than, bad talk you a little bit, which, who cares at the end of the day. But yeah.
Follow-up question for Richard. When you say that your team couldn't have handled that, you're talking about sort of your executive team, the folks who would have been involved in, that you would have had to have involved in due diligence?
Well, Mike and I were basically the executive team to a large degree. So it's a relatively flat piece. I think if it had gotten, so we're manufacturing, super blue collar, super sophisticated in what they did, but maybe unsophisticated for this type of thing. So I just think it would have created so many questions and doubt. And I think it would have been a challenge to keep everybody looking forward instead of looking sideways and backwards. I think that's what I mean as far as team. We had, a couple of people obviously, but we waited to bring them in really until even after the financial diligence piece. So, so we.
Well, and let's be clear, the word Rosemary process, can describe a lot of different things. In Michael and Richard's case, our process was talking to 2 companies. So once they realized there's this industry dynamic at work that might generate a potential sale, our process was to talk to both of the suppliers. Look, it kept them both honest, and I think ended up with a better valuation because of that. So sometimes process, Rosemary, does not mean you've got to go through a long, involved, complicated, bid cycle. Although I think once you decide that selling makes sense, you're likely to get more if you go through a process. But to Richard and Michael's point, there are some downsides to doing that.
Thank you.
Rich, you're muted.
Man, I can't believe I did that. How long have I been doing this? All right. Mark Stoner question is, what are your thoughts about selling service-based businesses? And what's the best way to let employees know about a sale, include them, give them a bonus to stay on, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, Mark, these principles apply to any kind of business, service business, product business. I mean, the concept of a strategic buyer and how finding their motivation, finding their ulterior motivation these are universal principles. Now, the whole thing about letting employees know, there is no right or wrong. I've seen some situations where sellers tell their employees the day after a sale. I've seen some situations where the sellers will bring their key team in and tell them we're going through a process and let them know. There's no rules here because oftentimes it's pretty obvious when the nature of the buyer, what they plan to do with the company after. So and more times than not, your employees are going to be fine because they want buyers are buying an ongoing enterprise. So employees tend to get more fearful than they should. And yeah, to offer a bonus, incentive, something like that makes some sense. But there's really no right or wrong answer. And I would almost say you have to. It's so situational. I want to be careful not to lay down too many rules on how to do that.
Jim, I've got a question, if I may. First, great job. Not that I'm surprised. But what is typically the expectation on the part of the buyer of the owner? In other words, is there typically an expectation that the owner will stay on for a period of time to help transition? Is that expectation part of a larger earnout, perhaps over a period of 5 years? And if so, does that help with the valuation? So tell me, I mean, there's some, I know every situation is different and you can't really just generalities.
Yeah. Every situation is different. Again, that sounds like a dodge of an answer, but some cases, the buyer needs the owner to stay and help make it. Now let's assume we're talking after some kind of transition. Let's assume we're talking after a 3 to 6 month transition. Sometimes the owner or the buyer says, "Hey, we can handle it from here. We've got a management team. We're out of here. You can leave." In the case when I sold my radio business 21 years ago to a big publicly traded radio company, they didn't need me anymore. They had 150 radio stations. My 3, can just kind of folded right into their system. But they asked me to take on a whole new responsibility. They moved me to a different opportunity. I mean, I created a whole different kind of career path for me, which is really how I got started at M&A, by the way, because I ended up running their M&A department. So every situation, again, it sounds like a throwaway answer. Every situation is different, but it really depends on the what the buyer is bringing to the table and their motivation.
And it probably goes, and this isn't my world of expertise, but I also think it probably depends on those things you talked about where it's owner independence. I think it just depends on how that's set up. I mean, if you're in the weeds of it every day, it's probably tough to detach yourself from the buyer standpoint, I would guess.
Yeah.
I laugh because we had to stay 3 months. And I think when the clock hit 3 months, Mike's car was already running and was in the back seat. So, and I ended up staying a little longer, but it was just because I wanted to. And so, that's kind of how it worked for us. What else? Great questions.
Generally speaking, shorter is better, generally speaking.
But you also have like that, I mean, for us, we looked at that as the time to set, like, if we're going to stay, the only time we get to negotiate that is on the front end. Right. And so, you kind of set, I was able to fortunately, we were able to set our terms on what we wanted to do. And they didn't care if we stayed or not. So we were lucky, they really didn't care. So.
Right.
What else? Anybody else? These are great. Well, Marla, do you want to go ahead and break out, or how do you want to do this?